Stand at the place where Keaton Otis, a young black man, was murdered by Portland police. Oh, no. Okay, thank you. Those are very smooth, though. But I feel like I'd be a little Terminator in them. I'll just squint at y'all like I'm grumpy. So, to stand at the place where Keaton Otis, a young black man, was killed by Portland police almost 5 years ago. So, May 12th, next month, it'll be 5 years since executed right on this spot, and behind all of this there are still bullet holes in the wall, and this is where Keaton was left for hours in the street to bleed to death. We can talk a little bit more just about the basic specifics of the case, but I think, you know, that 5-year memorial is incredibly powerful. It's incredibly powerful that every month for 5 years we've had a vigil here. That these vigils were started by Keaton's father, Fred Bryant, who was a tireless warrior for his son until he passed away a year and a half ago. And so we continue these on in the names of Keaton, in the name of Fred, in the name of Alicia, who is Keaton's sister, and Fred's daughter, who is Black Youth Leadership in this work, and continue it in the name of justice for the Black community and for our city our world. And so next month, May 12th, we're actually going to have a larger event. So there, we're still working on finalizing the location, which will probably happen this week. So there's a Facebook event page. So if you go to the Justice for Keaton Otis Facebook, you can join it and we'll update it once we have a location. We're going to have a program where we have family members of other folks who have lost loved ones to police violence speak, where we are going to be able to incorporate some poetry and music created for Keaton and in the context of this work. Really just have a longer space to honor and remember Keaton, to honor and remember Fred, and to honor and recommit ourselves to this ongoing work. And so I hope that everyone's able to make it. Please help us spread the word. And again, I'm just incredibly appreciative that folks continue to come out for this, month after month, to hold this space of remembrance and recommitment to justice.
It is very important that we all continue. And what I'd like to say to you today is, last year, as we approached the anniversary of the death of Keaton Otis, I decided that I needed to go through all of the documents all over again, because I was missing something. And I found something, and it was hidden in plain sight. So here on the site is the best place to explain what happened. So if you have Keaton Otis's car back here, and you have Officer Andy Polis standing behind the car at the left rear wheel.
Do we want to back up a little bit so folks may not know the entire story?
Oh. Well, there was a shooting here. There was a killing here. If you want to start at the beginning of the event, I can tell you that Officer Cody Byrne picked Keaton Otis as Keaton Otis went by. Keaton Otis wasn't doing anything, he just went by. Cody Byrne signaled to Officer Foote and Dufresne, and they decided to follow him at very close range. One was to his right, one was directly behind him. Those of you that have read this, you know this is what happened. And when Keaton Otis tried to get out of this box, which is an illegal form of pursuit, they then decided that they needed to call a code 3, which is major. It's a major They pulled him over here, and Then Officer Chris Burley, by way of saying hello, punched him in the face and grabbed his arm and tried to pull him out the window. Christine Leas was in that house over there filming this. So you can go online and you can see the film. But the part that was missing was who fired the first shot. They said it was Keaton Otis, but it wasn't. It was Officer Andy Polis standing to the rear of the car, shooting through the rear window. Bullets came flying out through the windshield, seen by someone who lived just directly above. He thought Keaton Otis did the firing. The district attorney, in talking with him, changed the word windshield to windows. That was the confusing part. You always expected, well, if they knew better, then somewhere along the way they would tell us better, but they never did. But that's the fundamental point, was that it was Officer Andy Polis who fired the first 6 shots. Then, if this witness had been telling the truth, he saw Keaton Otis firing to the north, then Keaton Otis would never have hit Chris Burley, who was to the west at the time. So the police knew from the very, very, very beginning of this case that the narrative that they were putting out to the public was false. They knew it all along. All right, then what happened? As this narrative progressed, the district attorney bought into it and tried to prove it. The other thing that's really important to know is that the medical examiner also started to commit perjury, is what I'm really saying. These people are committing perjury, they're falsifying the evidence. But she was loath to say in front of the grand jury what ends up being in another report. But very specifically, there is a report of one bullet that enters through the bicep, comes out through the forearm, goes in through the midline, into the diaphragm, through the liver, stops at the spine, but doesn't bleed. It's called gunshot wound number 8 in the documents, if you look that up. The point being that the catastrophic failure of the circulation by the chest wounds, which were so enormous, meant that there wasn't any blood to bleed, which means that Keaton Otis died in surrender pose. He was the second African-American male to die in surrender pose in Portland, Oregon, because the police were shooting people who had their hands up. The second one back here, that makes it 100% for the year 2010, which is what I was looking at. So when Fred was trying to talk to these detectives about this subject, his question was, did you do gunshot residue tests? Did you do fingerprints on the gun? And the answer to Fred was no, because that's what they do in the movies. That's not for real. Well, the OIR group looked at this case and declared that the case was just fine, but they noted the absence of the gunshot residue test, the fingerprint test, on the bullets on the gun, and called it, not a really shameful oversight, but, an oversight that should never have taken place. Well, if you know that you planted the gun, if you know there are not going to be any fingerprints, then you're not going to go and ask somebody to document no fingerprints, no gunshot residue. So what I'm trying to say here is that Fred took a lot of grief from an awful lot of people because he believed in justice. And I'm here to say that I worked for 5 years to vindicate Fred's belief in himself, in his son, in justice. in the community, in the people, all of you who are standing here. I've stood with Fred in every kind of weather on this corner. Rain and snow and sleet, cold, heat. You name it, we were here, we did it. I call that soul power. And he launched his soul power against the willpower of the power structure in Portland. From my point of view, he sets an example to all of us that we can take to heart. First of all, when you know you're right, don't give up. Keep on being right. Just keep on being right. And the other thing about that is, Fred ended up with so many people. That's who you are. You are Fred's people, all of you. I cannot help but believe that Fred hears us, sees us. I think Keaton Otis and Fred may even be having a good time saying, hey, look at our people. Here they are, gathered one more time. But we can do the will of God, because, you know, the big question here in front of us is, what does the Lord require of us? Not optional, requirement. Do justly. Do it. Love, mercy. Yes, have some compassion, and then walk humbly with God. I notice the city is walking very arrogantly, very proudly, but we don't have to do that. We do have each other, and I don't know if this irritates them, but I am surprised with all of this fancy stuff going on with this building. Hang tight together, love one another, and remember fondly why we're here, who we're here for. We're Fred's people.
Yeah, that's powerful. I love that. We're Fred's people, definitely. And you know, I think I appreciate you sharing those specifics of the case. I think it's incredibly important to learn, you know, to learn the specifics of what happened, as well as to learn the specifics of who these folks were, right? That they are not just pictures, they're not just names that we hold up, that they are human beings, that they are loved ones, that they are children, parents, and siblings, and community members, and there is a hole in our community every time someone is executed by the police in our communities. And I think, you know, if you wanted to learn more about the facts of the case, you can go to justiceforkeatonotis.wordpress.com. It has immense amounts of information that detail so much of what you were talking about, and show just the, I mean, you know, you were very nice, where you were like, perjury, you know, yeah. It's lies, it's blatant, outright.
Well, but perjury is a crime. Lying seems to be politics.
Right. But I think one thing that's really important, that we go back to the very beginning, when these police officers from the Heat Squad, right, the Hotspot Enforcement Team, Enforcement Action Team, decided to follow Keaton, they did so because they said he looked like a gangster, right? And we have to hold that, right? We have to hold that this was not just some random stop. They weren't just bored and they decided, hey, whatever car comes next, we're going to follow that car, right? They didn't follow Keaton because supposedly he had, quote unquote, mental health concerns, right? That we absolutely have to talk about mental health concerns in our communities and ways to support folks and to create, you know, holistic, sustainable, loving communities for everyone. But this had nothing to do with that as far as those police were concerned. Keaton Otis was stopped and executed within 6 minutes of him being stopped right here on this corner for being a black man. Right? From the beginning of when they started following him to when they stopped him, it was 6 minutes. And so I think, you know, I think it's incredibly important that we hold on to that, right? That folks of color, that not just black men, but, you know, black women and black trans folks especially disproportionately experience, you know, the blatant and brutal force of policing in this country. And we have to hold that Keaton is part of that. Keaton is absolutely part of Black Lives Matter. Fred Bryan is part of Black Lives Matter as well. He gave his life trying to get justice for his son. He made himself sick doing this, right? The doctor said, you have to stop. You will kill yourself. And he said, I'm not stopping until I get justice for my son. And he died, right? And so Joe Bean Keller, who also lost a son in the 1990s, spoke recently at a panel on Ferguson, and he talked about his other son passed a few years later because of the grief and the health concerns that came from losing his brother in such a way. And he says that, you know, it was one bullet and two people died, right? That one bullet killed both of his sons. Those actually 32 bullets that were shot at Keaton, 23 of them hitting him, killed Keaton and killed Fred as well. I think that that's incredibly important to hold on to that. But in the context of wanting to make sure that we are centering this in folks who are real people and not just, you know, names and statistics that we talk about, I wanted to introduce Frances, who actually her children played with Keaton and grew up. So
they
grew up together. So if you wanted to just share a little bit about Keaton.
Since my youngest son, Fabian, was about 4, they played t-ball together. I have a picture of all of them playing t-ball together. Right. Who I didn't know until recently, has the same name as middle name, was my oldest son. The last time I saw Keaton, he was on the train, and he was really happy, excited about his trip to Canada that he had recently taken, and talking about how culturally it was so different up there, and all of the boys have talked together, amongst young men, have talked together about these situations. They had had those conversations before. When Keaton told the woman who was there to please not leave, they're going to kill me, he knew what was going on. You know, this is not an uncommon practice. And the one thing, my sons have both been profiled in their own neighborhood many times when they were teenagers. Now they're grown men. What I read in the police report was when Keaton drove by, they said he was wearing a hoodie on a hot day, and he was driving a car that didn't look like it belonged to him. It was his mama's car. Okay. That's why they stopped following him. And they said that when they looked at him, he looked at them like he knew something they didn't know. Well, of course he did. He knew a lot more than me. He was a very intelligent young man. And he was an artist. He and my youngest son, Fabian, were making T-shirts together. He was designing T-shirts, and they were making them, ironing them on Grandma's piano bench, which older sons got upset with them about. But the point is, I talked to Fred. I think one of the last times I saw him, he was across the street over there, and it was a cold day, and he had to sit down because his head was hurting. And I asked him if I had his permission to talk about this to whoever, whenever, however, just until somebody does something about it. He said, yes, go right ahead. So I'm talking, and I won't stop talking, because this was totally wrong. It was an injustice that cannot be hidden and cannot be swept under the rug. And the city of Portland needs to address it directly instead of hiding behind these little committees and everything. That's my most frustrating thing for me right now, is that for 40 years, since I moved into Northeast Portland with my young family, I have seen this stuff go on. I've seen people go talk about it for years and years and years and years. And the city always comes together with the committee and passes it off. I'm tired of people pretending like they don't see and pretending like they need more numbers. They don't need any more numbers. They need all of these children who have told them what's wrong. They need to believe them. They don't need a videotape. They need to believe the citizens of this city. That's what needs to happen. Anyway, Keaton was a wonderful man.
And I think that, you know, that piece is so important, that this is, you know, part of a historic pattern, right? Unfortunately, this is nothing new. That, as there was a recent report that said that just in the month of March that police in the United States had killed more people than all of the police in the United Kingdom in the past 100 years, right? By double. So in 100 years, UK police had killed 52 people. In the month of March 2015, police in the United States had killed 111 people. I think that it's important to hold that, and I'm certainly not letting the UK off of the hook and being like, they're amazing. I remember colonialism. Let's start there and go from there. But I think that it's important, again, that this is something that is embedded into the foundations of the way that our systems function, right? The criminalization of black and brown folks is what this nation is built on. This nation is built on stolen land, on genocide, on chattel slavery. That is the foundation. Absolutely genocide. And that this process never ended. It continues to this day. It may have shifted forms to meet the modern day needs, but this process continues unbroken and unabated. And these police killings that happen constantly are part of that mechanism of control, containment, and exploitation of communities of color, potentially rebellious communities, and currently rebellious communities, because that's what we're seeing happening across the country, around the world, right? Communities of color are continuing to rise up, continuing to say that this is not going to continue, that business will not continue as normal, that we actually are demanding the right to self-determine in our own communities, to decide what happens to our communities, that, you know, black and brown youth especially are seizing the power to shape the future. And I think that that is also incredibly important to hold on to, right? Alicia Bryant, who again is Keaton's sister and Fred's daughter, unfortunately couldn't be here today. She will be at the memorial to speak, but you know, she was, I think, 20 or 21 when Fred passed away, and she stepped into that leadership position, right? That is a lot to carry after losing your brother and then losing your father. And she said, I can't let either of them have died in vain. I'm going to continue this work, right? And she is part of that black youth leadership that is happening again internationally. And so I think it's, you know, it's incredibly important that we honor the resistance that this immense repression and, you know, brutal oppression breeds, right? That is also part of the continuous line of resistance, of building new worlds, of pushing back, of creating change. And that by being here and continuing that, we are also part of that, and we continue to move that forward as we move out, right? To have the power to say, to start with saying, what kind of city do we want to live in, right? I think that too often we start with the question, well, what's realistic, right? What could we get? What could we negotiate out of this system? I think that, you know, the strongest movements are those that start from the place of saying, what is the world that we want to live in? And then how do we build that world right here and right now? So I'd love to maybe just do a go-around so we can hear some other voices.
Can I just say one thing? Yeah. People wonder why my sons, Keaton's cousins, friends aren't here. It's too painful. They have lost friends to prison and to all kinds of things, and to murder and to execution. And it's very painful for them to be here. I don't think they trust their response. I think they'll be angry. Their response will be angry. So they do things in other venues to deal with this. Just so you know, it's hurtful to a whole lot of people.
I think that's really important to bring forth, and I think also the connections you're making with the other ways that these oppressions function, right? Prisons are intimately connected to this, right? That when folks are criminalized, they're criminalized for execution, they're criminalized for incarceration, right? And we see folks being entombed in living deaths in this country's prisons for the same reason that Keaton was executed here in the street. But I was trying to say, like, resistance, rebuilding the world, we have the power. Awesome. So I'd love to maybe just go around and if folks wanted to share just super briefly, I love you all, super briefly. Just one thing that one change you could imagine that could help end police violence, and it can be anything, right? It could be something super small, like, you know, just talking more to my neighbors, right? Or it could be something huge, like, you know, we have to overthrow capitalism, whatever, you know, anywhere in there, in between as well. So maybe if someone wants to start, we can just kind of move around. Just one change you can think of to end police violence.
Stop calling the police.
Stop calling the police. Maybe we'll go this way. Right.
Such a big question, my God. I'm going to say empowering you because I work with you, so that's my focus.
Empowering you.
Yeah.
Well, if there have to be police, then I think that they should patrol in their own neighborhoods so that they really know the people that they're overseeing.
Police living in menacing neighborhoods as they patrol.
Yeah, I want to say more towards
Community policing.
I think we can decolonialize our own minds, and there's so many layers of that.
Decolonize our minds, I imagine.
I would say taking away the police's weapons.
Disarm the police.
Getting to know and trust one another so we're not calling the police.
Get rid of the systems that make people feel unsafe.
Maybe we'll go to the bathroom. I don't know if you wanted to share a thought. We're just saying one thing that could change to end police violence. To end police violence, just one change that could end police violence.
Create art with each other, for ourselves.
Create art to envision possibilities.
Documenting and sharing histories of resistance.
This history.
Understanding that peace is not quiet. Peace can sometimes be quite active.
Quite loud.
Telling our children the truth about creating community safety teams. So call them instead of police.
Talk about how we're all complicit in disposability and what that means.
Think about what the cops protect and serve. I mean, it's no accident that, you know, this rebuilding and gentrification is happening.
Deep sense of complete personal responsibility. That this is mine. This is where I live. It's mine. Work really hard at building intentional communities.
Defund police?
Defund police.
Defund what?
Police.
Showing leaders that people are paying attention and do care.
Redefine accountability. All the other things everybody said, and until that happens, like making sure that the prosecutors and the people that they're accountable to are not of the system, like have special prosecutors holding these people accountable.
I'm just going to echo what you said about capitalism and redefining economic models so that people have actual survival options.
Yeah, I also want to echo disarming, defunding, and then ultimately disbanding the police.
Fewer guns overall.
Fewer guns.
To not lose hope that we can and will change things.
Silence is the voice of complicity.
Silence is the voice of complicity.
Invite my family and friends to the monthly vigil and as a way to continue the conversation.
Talking to family and friends.
On the subject of defunding the police, in this week's Mercury, an outside consultant is recommending adding 21 police officers to the Portland Police Force. Confront City Hall, reduce, defund the police.
Especially for other white folks, like if you have family or friends that don't agree with you about this stuff, that argue with you about this stuff, that post things even on Facebook counter to the idea that there's police violence, you have to argue with them. We can't just say, oh, I don't want to argue with my parents, I don't want to argue with my friends. We responsibility to not be quiet and to not try to be comfortable.
Kind of in that same vein, I think every time, like especially as a white person, if you don't speak to racism in yourself and other people because you're afraid for your job, you're afraid to lose a friend, you're afraid to get a bad grade, that's theft. Like you're stealing power by doing that, and that's something like I want to work on in myself forever.
Stop being afraid of each other, basically. Don't buy into the stereotypes.
Actually get to know one another.
A lot of stuff, but one thing I thought of was spending the money, the time, and the effort to develop a way to screen out the racist bigots before they even get on the police department so that they aren't in the position to be able to speak.
There's a suggestion that's been made to the President's Council on respect, making respect mandatory on the part of the police. And I asked Training Division, has anybody in Portland ever been fired for having their disrespect force an escalation and force them to use force? And these guys had this big conference about they never heard of anybody that ever got fired for disrespect. So that, a project of respect, together with something called de-escalation, could probably make a sane group out of this group once we remove the people you're talking about that got in there.
It used to be that police cars in the city of Portland had a sign on them. They had big rows for the road city, but they also said protect and serve. You don't see that anymore. That sign's not on cars anymore. Why is that? It's because we don't insist on it. That's why.
Or maybe they decided to stop engaging in false advertising. Yes. And again, just responding to that idea, one thing that could change to end police violence and just keeping it short so we can hear all the voices.
Continuing to support the organizing of the community to get out. And in Ferguson, the example was that they've elected some people on the commissioners or whatever, the city council. So that could effectively affect how the police work and, you know, just open it up more. So
yeah,
organizing.
Supporting the organizing that's being done on the ground.
I'll film myself even, I guess. I'm thinking just reconsider what we want for our own police and redefining our own police for our community instead of the police system that we have.
Build community power so that it's obvious to everyone that police are obsolete.
Abolish prisons.
There have to be courts. Let's prosecute officers as if they were people.
Those were all great ideas, guys. I love them.
Yeah, they're not going to give you anything. None of this stuff is going to happen. You have to take it from them. Everybody film the police. Film the police. Faden Santana, if he hadn't have filmed what happened to Walter Scott, would have been forgotten. Went for my taser. I was scared. Fuck them. Film them. It's the only way you're going to take it back from them. Yeah. You're welcome.
You can't cuss. I'm just saying that's
okay.
A good suggestion.
Break down borders of all kinds.
I would say try to expand the definition of racism so that more white people understand how we uphold it every day.
Community self-defense.
I'm sorry.
Community self-defense.
Did everyone get a chance to I mean, I think that's incredible, right? That was an amazing spectrum of ideas that are things we could start doing right now, right? This moment. And then there are things that we can be working on long term as well as intermediate steps. And I think it's important, again, we talk about that a lot here, that a movement contains multiple strategies, people working at different levels for a common vision. If it doesn't contain that, then it's not a movement and it's probably not going to be successful. So I think that a lot of times we end up thinking, you know, there's one right way to achieve justice or freedom or self-determination. The reality is that's not true. That's a very you know, mainstream way of thinking, right? That's the system. There's one way or not, right? It's a binary. The reality is there are as many ways to achieve justice and freedom as we can dream. And so I think it's just powerful to hear all of that together and to know that, again, we are empowered to do this. Some of these suggestions might take a little bit longer, maybe, you know, a couple days. But, but you know, I think, again, that this is all together and part of a movement. And so I didn't know if you wanted to say anything, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do want to honor you as this is, for people who don't know, this is Kent Ford. He has been engaged in struggle in this community for decades. He was one of the founders of the Black Panther Party here in Portland, and he continues that work every day in many arenas, especially looking at his son, another Portland son, like Keaton Otis, Patrice Lumumba Ford, who was incarcerated on incredibly trumped up charges, targeted because of his identity, and he was still incarcerated because of that, tying together, as you said, police and these executions. So I don't know if you wanted to share anything brief, Ken.
Santana went down to the police station to give him his video, you know, the young man from the Dominican Republic, and he was on his way to work. I mean, everybody probably read it, but, and then they told him to wait, and he got scared and he left. So, you know, and then he seen the family come out to put flowers on, just like Fred. He said, this lady here in the purple, here and her husband, they've been on this thing from the very beginning with Fred. Fred was in the ill health. Everybody knows Fred was in the ill health, you know, but just struggled with this until the end. Just this last case here a couple of days ago, you know, we all know, you know, what happens, you know, the taser and all this stuff, you know, it's just all these stories, you know, stories, you know. So in Fred's case, it ran over to the other side of the family. It was a week after Aaron Cameron got shot, and then week or two, yeah. It ran over to the other side of the family and got them to co-sign their shit. And they did, you know, pushing and intimidation and all that stuff, you know, and I don't need it. That's what happened, you know, and then, why do they have to shoot the man 22 times? Why do they have to shoot the man in the back 8 times? That don't make sense.
I think, you know, the piece about filming is incredibly important, and I also think it's important to recognize that, you know, we have had films in many of these cases where police officers were not fired, they were not disciplined, grand juries returned non-indictment, they didn't spend a day in jail, and they got back pay for any time that they were suspended, which basically meant they got a very nice vacation. So I think it's also important to recognize that we have to make structural changes, right? That it's not enough to make surface changes, but we have to really talk about, again, how are these institutions rooted in this history of repression? So I wanted to create space if anyone had events that were coming up or announcements of work that was happening to connect all this together. Again, that this is about a movement, and as was said before, the connections between gentrification and police killings, there are direct correlations. Does anyone have any events?
Isn't Trayvon's mother supposed to be here tomorrow?
Right, yes.
Maranatha Church.
Maranatha. So Trayvon Martin's mother will be speaking tomorrow night at Maranatha Church at 6:30 p.m.
Can I come up front? Is that okay with you?
I'll be brief.
Super brief, yeah.
I don't know how brief I can be.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
You just re-qualified it. Hi, I'm Barry Joe Stahl. 10 years ago, I was living up here at 4066 Northeast Grand. In 2005, my nonprofit affordable housing landlord filed a 30-day no cause I appealed. The landlord destroyed $20,000 worth of my property as my appeal was pending. At the time that was going on, I was appealing a conviction for possession of marijuana when I was protected under the Medical Marijuana Act, but the police officer who brought those charges shot James Jahar Perez up in St. John's. I got a felony conviction because the cop who brought the charges fatally shot and killed an unarmed black man. As I was appealing, the landlord destroyed my life's work. And right now, for the past 3.5 years, that nonprofit landlord's 5-plex has been vacant, meaning over $100,000 worth of affordable housing rent hasn't been collected. They're partnering with the Portland Development Commission, the Portland Housing Bureau, and everybody knows about this now, including you.
I just want to ask, is there something you're asking?
So the action is Gretchen Kafori Memorial Vigil. The place is called Kafori Court, named after Gretchen Kafori, who died March 13, 2015. You all should go up to 4066 Northeast Grand and do something about that, because I've done plenty, and I'll help you all. Thank you.
There is an event on Tuesday.
What is the event on Tuesday?
On Tuesday at 10 o'clock at the county offices at the end of the
Hawthorne Bridge.
on the east side. It's not just the police, but all of these agencies that are in cahoots with the police, like child services, foster care, protective services, all of the government agencies in which the institution of racism is alive and well. So it's not just about the police, as I understand it. So it's 10 o'clock Tuesday.
And it's part of a national day of action against mass incarceration.
All right, so that's Tuesday at
10 a.m. in front of the Multnomah County building right at the end of the Hawthorne Bridge.
Against what corporation?
Against mass incarceration.
Okay, sorry.
National Day of Action. Also on this Friday, arresting power is going to be shown at the Center for Intercultural Organizing on North Killingsworth, 6 to 8 p.m. right over there at PCC Cascade. Arresting Power is a documentary about police violence in Portland from the 60s to today, and includes several of the people here today, but about many of these young men and women who have been killed by police in Portland.
Absolutely. And it actually includes the last interview footage of Fred, so that was the last time he spoke. So it's incredibly powerful. We'll actually be screening a clip of it at the memorial, but I encourage you to see the entire film, to see it, as you said, in the context, the larger context. And I think one thing that's incredibly powerful about that film is it shows the history of police violence, as well as the resistance that has existed the entirety of that police violence. So it doesn't just focus on, wow, everything's terrible, it says, and people have been fighting to change this, and we can be part of that ongoing struggle.
There'll be a noise demo at the youth detention facility April 14th at 7 o'clock.
April 14th, 7 o'clock at the youth detention facility. Which one?
The one that's up on
Donald E. Long.
Donald E. Long. Anything else?
Hi, my name is Jess. We coordinate a prisoner mail program. We have a monthly mail event writing folks through political education on the inside, and through documenting and sharing supporting folks and connecting them to resources. That's really vital for assistance. Facebook page, if you like it, we post our events regularly on there. And as the mail program gets larger, it's been around for about a year now. There's definite need to continue to connect those resources. So if you have time, you definitely coordinating with them.
What should people look for on Facebook?
So critical resistance, and if you just critical resistance Portland, and if you like the page, that's what people look for.
So Critical Resistance Portland regularly does writing to prisoners' names, and y'all can like the page and then get the updates. And again, next month, May 12th at 6 p.m., 6 to 8, we'll be doing the 5-year memorial for Keaton Otis and also for Fred Bryant. And we will be announcing that location soon, so definitely look on the Facebook for Keaton Otis. And I actually, some folks know I'm a poet, and so I didn't write anything. But I actually wanted to end with a poem because I just was like, why have we not been doing that? I don't know. Don't ask me. But we're going to now. It's actually from Assata Shakur, who was a former political prisoner, former Black Panther, and an incredible writer. If you haven't read her biography, please read it. You could probably read it tonight. It's incredibly captivating. And so I just read this poem when I'm looking for hope and for strength. And so it's called Affirmation. I believe in living. I believe in the spectrum of beta days and gamma people. I believe in sunshine, in windmills and waterfalls, tricycles and rocking chairs. I believe that seeds grow into sprouts and sprouts grow into trees. I believe in the magic of the hands and the wisdom of the eyes. I believe in rain and tears and in the blood of infinity. I believe in life, and I have seen the death parade march through the torso of this earth, sculpting mud bodies in its path. I have seen the destruction of the daylight and seen bloodthirsty maggots prayed to and saluted. I have seen the kind become the blind, and the blind become the bind in one easy lesson. I have walked on cut glass. I have eaten crow and blender bread and breathed the stench of indifference. I have been locked by the lawless, handcuffed by the haters, gagged by the greedy. And if I know anything at all, it's that a wall is just a wall and nothing more at all. It can be broken down. I believe in living. I believe in birth. I believe in the sweat of love and in the fire of truth. And I believe that a lost ship, steered by tired, seasick sailors, can still be guided home to port. Before we end, just in that spirit of creating community and that idea of actually getting to know each other, I'd love if you feel comfortable to introduce yourself to one person you don't know and just say why you came here tonight. And so just to continue building together, so we're not just folks standing around and listening to those of us up here talk, but that we're actually building community and holding all of this together. So thank you all so much for coming. Introduce yourself if you want to, and please come next month, May 12th. Location soon to be